Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining in. This webinar is hosted to you by GRCTS, also known as GRC Training Solutions. My name is Alvin, and here on the first slide, we're just listing some of the things that we take care, just to let you know that we basically cover all types of compliance and non-compliance related training topics. And here you can see HR, payroll, life science, pharma, medical, and a huge list of them. And in the next slide, we also let you know that we cover some of the live, recorded, in-person, that's face-to-face, on-site trainings that if you have a requirement, we can send an expert over to your company at your location and get you trained, get your employees trained. We also provide LMS trainings, and we also have corporate subscription plans. Basically, that means that you pay a little amount, either monthly, quarterly, or annually, but you take advantage of the huge list of topics that we have available for you as well as your colleagues at workplace. And here is our contact information, listing some of the industries and some of the categories that we cover within an industry. And if you have a requirement within any of these sections, don't hesitate to contact us at support@grcts.com or just visit our website www.grcts.com. You can also call us at 248-233-2049. Today we will be discussing about detecting and preventing travel and entertainment expense reimbursement fraud, and it's being presented to you by Peter Goldman.
Great. Thank you very much, Alvin. And to those of you with us here today, thanks for joining, and welcome to the presentation. We hope that you'll derive some useful and actionable advice on how to both detect and prevent the various numerous forms of travel and entertainment fraud. To be more specific, our agenda will start with a statistical overview of the fraud threat in general. These are statistics which I'll explain a little bit further on that are derived from reputable professional associations and other organizations that are directly involved with assisting organizations prevent and detect fraud. So they are reliable and accurate statistics. We want to set for you a backdrop of a feel for just how serious the overall fraud threat is and how serious the T&E fraud threat is in particular. Then we'll dive into the main types of T&E, and we'll touch on P-card fraud as well, since it is in many instances closely related. This will be a voluminous demonstration of the main kinds of T&E fraud that are committed against most organizations, although I will just give you the caveat that it is not exhaustive. We've tried to find the most serious threats to share with you, and just to keep in mind that this is a moving target, as is the case with many types of fraud. And once you understand some of the schemes that we'll be sharing with you today that you may not be already familiar with, it'll help to recognize new forms of these as they crop up. And then we'll move specifically to the real takeaways from this presentation, which are how to efficiently detect and effectively prevent these specific types of T&E fraud. Again, a caveat, there is unfortunately no general off-the-shelf, one-size-fits-all T&E fraud prevention protocol. The good news, however, is that in recent years, fraud investigators and other anti-fraud professionals have collectively created for us a set of best practices which can, in many instances, be readily adapted to an individual organization's processes and procedures. And then, as Alvin mentioned at the end, we will be more than happy to take your questions should you have any. So again, to start off, we'll look at some of these data. Most of these come from, to be a bit more specific than I was on the previous slide, from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which some of you may be familiar with. Those unfamiliar with the ACFE, it is the preeminent professional organization for individuals either directly or indirectly involved in fraud investigation, fraud detection, auditing, for fraud, law enforcement, and so forth. It has about 85,000 members. They do exhaustive research on approximately 60 different types of fraud. T&E is just one of them. And they tell us overall, and they do this research on an ongoing basis, reporting about once every 2 years. Their conclusion is from the research that $3.5 billion is lost globally to fraud. That represents, according to the association, roughly 5% of gross global product. You can see, do the math yourself, and make it see clearly that this is not an insignificant number. More importantly and more directly applicable to your particular situation is that the association tells us this 5% average can be extrapolated down to the individual organization, so that, in other words, the average for-profit, not-for-profit government agency loses an average of 5% of its gross revenue in any given 12-month period. Now, obviously, it is hoped that your organization is on the lower end, that it loses less than 5%, and there are many that do with effective and rigorous controls in place. Unfortunately, others, particularly smaller organizations, tend to lose a bit more of their gross revenue, but it all averages out to approximately 5%, and you can do the math for yourself. My guess is that it's not going to be a readily overlooked number. The average cost for each incident of fraud, and here we're talking again about the average of approximately average cost per incident of 60 or so different types of fraud, ranging from T&E fraud all the way to payroll, to accounts payable, to financial statement fraud, and everything in between. It's $160,000, which is in and of itself a rather startling number. There is, I suppose, comparatively speaking, a bit of good news in the next statistic showing us that expense reimbursement fraud on average costs victim organizations about $26,000. Now, that number may trigger a question mark in your mind as to how that too, by the context of T&E, is a fairly sizable number. The reason that $26,000 is the average, according to the association, is that this is a number derived from the fraud estimates based on victim organizations of all sizes in all industries. And what happens is that even though the majority of T&E frauds, as you may know already or soon will find out, are relatively small dollar scams, there are others, particularly those committed by upper management, that has the privilege, generally had generous travel and entertainment privileges to begin with, and also possess the ability to override whatever controls may exist limiting their spending ability within the T&E area. They may fly first class, they may stay at five-star hotels on international trips, they may dine and entertain at five-star restaurants, and when it all comes down to it, a 1 week or longer trip by a senior executive, traveling in style, if you will, on the company's dime, can easily add up to more than $30,000, $35,000, and that's why this number is dragged up higher. But keep in mind, as we look further into this in the coming slides, that the majority of these T&E schemes are much, much smaller dollar amounts than $26,000. According to J.P. Morgan Chase, the U.S. spends nearly $200 billion a year on travel and entertainment, and if you consider that 5% roughly of that is lost to fraud annually. We're talking about $10 billion, which is, again, for one country, even though it is the largest economy in the world, still not an insignificant number. And then importantly as well, this number comes from Kroll, which is a very well-respected, prominent international investigation agency. They tell us that 67% of all corporate fraud is committed by insiders. Now, that also is important in the broader context of the 60 or so different types of fraud that are searched on an ongoing basis by the association. Kroll has looked at those numbers and has come up with this percentage of frauds that are committed by insiders. With regard to T&E fraud, however, it is very important to keep in mind that this number is actually quite low. The majority, as you would imagine, the vast majority of T&E frauds are committed by insiders, your own employees. So that number really, in the case of T&E, is really more in the 90 to 95% area. There are some, and we'll touch on these, T&E scams which are collusive in nature and do involve external co-conspirators, but the vast majority of T&E frauds, as you would expect, are internally perpetrated. That said, let's take a closer dive into the specific numbers pertaining to various key functions within a, say, average organization. These, again, are numbers provided to us from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. What they've done here is they have ranked